Good evening and welcome to tonight's webinar. This is another in a series produced by Sarasota Strong. The picture in front of you is our motto, if you will. Our mission is to help create a trauma-informed community, which is a community that cares for itself. We're part of a national movement that's focused on helping to identify situations which are harmful to individual lives and the community in which they live. This is a mission which can only be fulfilled by everyone in the community working together to gain awareness in trauma issues and identifying responses that will work. One definition of this effort puts it this way: the ultimate goal is a community with a strong social fabric, positive health outcomes, meaningful community leadership, and vibrant community institutions. Now, don't be confused by the word trauma. It refers in this case to disruptions in our lives which reduce the quality of life and paths to a better future. These disruptions can throw you or a whole community off the track. So identifying them as they occur and laying out a plan to resolve them requires resilience. And that's why we have titled tonight's program, A Story of Resilience. Our meetings here in Newtown and other parts of Sarasota, as well as in Venice, are designed to provide information on trauma as a disruption in personal and community life, as well as providing strategies for overcoming these problems. Just as important as these meetings, our trainings and our website provide opportunities for all of us to learn from each other. And you will learn more about Sarasota Strong and the ways you can help at the close of this session. Tonight's sharing was developed by the Committee on Aging, Trauma, and Resilience. My name is Henry Warren, and I'm a member of that committee. I'm also a member of a group at the Senior Friendship Center known as the Aging Rebels. We have been gathering every week for almost 2 years now, more recently by Zoom. Our goal is to make friends and to develop a safe place to share life's difficulties and joys. You will hear from some of those rebels tonight. I developed an interest in aging and the place of elders in our community after retiring from management in Maine state government at an early age. I volunteered with a number of local nonprofits and then served as state president of AARP for 4 years in the early 1990s. My subsequent training as an interfaith chaplain then led to development of a hospice choir to sing in nursing homes and death situations. And all of these experiences set my life course, which has continued here in Florida for the last 5 years. It's expressed in my service as a volunteer chaplain at the Pines Nursing Home and as a member of my church's pastoral care team and our choir. Of course, like most people, I've had my own series of traumas, starting with the unexpected death of my father when I was 16 and he was 43. Fortunately, my grandfather and uncle took over for my devastated mother and helped the family to relocate. And I continued along with my sister in our high school and college careers, but in very different ways than originally planned. Resilience. At midlife and with 3 kids of varying ages, my wife and I decided that a divorce after 22 years was the best way to continue our friendship. The kids were very upset, but she and I worked hard to support them and each other through these difficult times and financial stresses. My most vivid memory is the day I drove away from our house to a new bachelor apartment and saw my kids wave goodbye in a rearview mirror. I am happily remarried and remain friends with my ex, and we co-parent the kids to this day. Where the kids co-parent us, not sure at times. Resilience. I'm also reminded of the time I left my post in the governor's cabinet after 8 years, which was a political appointment, and moved to a lower ranking job in order to continue building my retirement fund. It was a major disruption to move from a spacious office where I supervised over 300 staff members to an attic office where my desk shared space with storage materials. I did manage to work my way out of that situation and moved to several other roles. But early retirement was my ultimate reward and my goal, and I never regretted my choices. I retired at age 54. I noted earlier that I spent many years supporting older folks in various ways. Almost all of them had some form of trauma in their lives and needed supporting presence and help. As a result of these experiences and many others, I've had frequent encounters with the impacts of trauma, especially in nursing homes. The current limit on family visits and inside socializing makes life even more difficult for residents of those homes. A recent cover article in the Herald Tribune said, "Isolation hits seniors hard. Facilities must confront the mental toll of social distancing." Joining the Sarasota Strong efforts to develop programs aimed at older members of the community was an easy choice for me. Our goals reflect a concern about the impacts of aging on older members in these communities and their caregivers. This concern increases during the long pandemic that has no end in sight. Sarasota Strong is developing projects and programs for folks of all ages whose activities, social life, and health may be seriously affected by the limitations we currently live with. While the older members of the community may need more focused attention, their families and caregivers are also facing job loss, health issues, and child raising stresses because our schools are struggling to teach and also keep everyone safe. This evening, you will hear several stories about folks who have been handed a traumatic situation and developed the resilience to work through it and create a better life. I suspect there are many of you who have had or know of very similar situations. Partway through, we will hear from a professional musician about ways in which music can provide a soothing path to resilience in your life. And then we'll get some expert advice in simple terms about ways that you could evaluate a trauma situation that you might be facing. That's followed by some steps to work on a positive response. We have set aside some time at the end to ask questions of our speakers, and we ask that you go to the chat option on your Zoom screen at any time along the way and provide those questions in a clear and brief form. At the end, we'll do our best to get to all of them. And as I noted earlier, we will reserve the final minutes of the program for information about Sarasota Strong and our committee. And we hope that you will have an interest in learning more, sharing your ideas, and perhaps finding a program of interest that you can join. Now, with all that as background, I want to introduce our facilitator for the rest of the program, who is also a co-facilitator of Aging Rebels. Take it away, Michael Karp.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. You know, when I was asked to host this meeting for Sarasota Strong, I was a little bit concerned with the word trauma, because although I've had some problems in my life that have caused me to cope in a little different way than I was adjusted to, I never thought of my problems as necessarily being trauma. In my mind, the word trauma is a pretty strong word. So I like to think about it as some uneventful or unexpected event in my life where I may have had to change what I was about and what I was doing. And that has happened to me, as I'm sure it's happened to all of you. That unexpected event. And then learning how to cope with, as a famous author has said, Nancy, coping with life's ups and downs and not being overwhelmed. That's directed at Nancy. She wrote a book called Overwhelmed, Coping with Life's Ups and Downs. I just thought I'd give her a plug, if you don't mind. Okay, anyhow. I am the leader or the co-chair of the Aging Rebels. I was born and raised in the New York area, actually in the Bronx, and actually practiced law in New York as a practicing lawyer, having graduated from New York University and been a graduate of Cornell Law School. Practiced law in New York for 15 years. Wasn't happy, wasn't pleased with my life, wasn't happy with my practice. And was married at the time, 3 kids, and came home in a very unhappy state. My wife said, "This is not going well. We got to make a change." Knowing my wife, she was that engine that made those kinds of things happen. If something like that was going to happen, to change what was going on, she would have been the engine to make it happen. She always was. And fortunately, I was always able to put some gas in that engine, so we were able to do a lot of those things that we wanted. In any event, 1972, 48 years ago, we left the Bronx, Long Island, actually, living in Long Island at the time, and came down here to Sarasota. Had to take the bar examination again, which I did and passed it, and practiced law here in the Sarasota area from 1972 until I retired in 2002. Interesting career. I was a trial lawyer, so I had some rather interesting experiences. Didn't handle criminal work, handled civil trial work. Picked juries, tried cases, was used to getting up on my feet and speaking, and enjoyed it. In any event, things were moving along pretty good until about 2011. I remember that date because it was like 2 months before my 50th anniversary. My wife and I were planning a rather special trip on our 50th anniversary. It had to be canceled when she wound up going into the hospital because she had some stomach pain and they were trying to figure out what was wrong. And when she got out of the hospital, she just wasn't the same lady who went in. The pain in her tummy was gone, but she was, as I described it, off the wall. I would speak to her and she would come back with non sequiturs that just wasn't in keeping with her. This was a very social, communicative lady who suddenly seemed to lose the ability to communicate. Well, we found out that she was suffering from what was called then mild cognitive impairment, vascular dementia. And we were told that given the nature of dementia, it wasn't going to get better, it was going to get worse. And it did. It affected her thought processing, her memory, her balance for a short while. And suddenly, that unexpected event, trauma? No, unexpected event. I don't think of it as a trauma. That unexpected event cast me in a very different role. I suddenly had to become a caregiver. Now you understand, for the first 50 years of my marriage, my wife took care of me. She did. She was the engine that made my life go, as I said. And again, the partnership that we had was great because I was able to put gas in that engine. In any event, I took care of her for 7 years until she died in 2018. And I mean, I took care of her completely. She lived with me alone. And she was not a big lady, and I was bigger than her, so I was able to take care of her physically. And emotionally, she was just a delight. She was just so thankful of everything I did for her. I learned a lot. It was a great moment for me. I think I developed more compassion and understanding and feeling about being a human being and giving to other people than I had ever felt before. I guess I was always like that, because as a lawyer, I had always represented people who got injured, and I was always helping people. And I guess deep down inside, I've always had a need to help people. Well, I used to take her over to the Friendship Center for 4 hours a day, 4 days a week, just to kind of give her some socialization with people who were having the same kind of problems as she was having. And so I enrolled her at the daycare center. And then I was free. And I looked around, I said, okay, what am I going to do now? I had stopped playing golf, and I wasn't going to get involved in all that again. And I used to meet with 5 friends of mine, male friends, who were also retired. And we used to have lunch together. And at one particular time, I said, you know, instead of just sitting around and having lunch and shooting the bull, why don't we put some teeth in this and make it something that's worthwhile for the 5 of us? And they said, what do you mean? And I said, well, let's talk about what's going on in the world. What's happening now? That had to be 5, 6, maybe 7 years ago. And so, because my wife was at the Friendship Center, I contacted somebody there, and they gave us a little conference room at the Friendship Center. It was upstairs on the 2nd floor of the main building. And 5 or 6 of us, 5 of us used to meet for lunch. And we would sit at a conference table, and I started preparing an agenda for us to talk about topics that were happening in our lives. Again, putting some meat on that bone. Well, they put a blurb in their newsletter. They had a monthly newsletter. This is the Friendship Center. And suddenly people started showing up. And within about 2 months, 3 months, for some reason, we had outgrown that conference room. And so they moved us into another building, and they moved us into another conference room, and more people kept showing up. And this Friday discussion group, What's Happening Now, suddenly morphed. Get it, Nancy? Morphed? Okay. All right. That's a private joke. I learned a new word, morphed. I like the word, so I use it now. In any event, suddenly they had to move us into a bigger room. And 35 to 40 people wound up showing up on Fridays to partake of a discussion group, What's Happening Now. And aside from the content of the discussion group, subjects having to do with what was going on in life, am I preparing an agenda and creating an agenda that went out to a bunch of people. As a matter of fact, that group morphed into more than 50 people. I now send that agenda out to 52 or 54 people every single week. And we now Zoom every Friday, and 25 to 30 people show up and partake of this discussion group. The content, what's going on, interesting. More important, people need to socialize. People need to get together and to exchange thoughts and ideas. This is not a lecture. We meet, I throw out a topic, and I hope that people jump in and everybody gets a chance to speak. And I become a moderator, a leader. Very unexpected role. I mean, I had been a lawyer my whole life, but moderator, leader, facilitator, that wasn't me. In any event, 2 ladies from that Friday group got hold of me one day and said, would you like to lead another group? And I said, no, 1 is enough. She said, no, this would be different. We'd like to set up a group that would talk about the aging process, aging. And although I knew about aging because I had been aging. I really had no expertise in it. And so I got together with the president, the CEO of the Friendship Center, Erin McLeod, and she introduced me to Nancy Schlossberg. And Nancy and I sat and we put together a program about aging. And we have been leading that group now as co-chairs for the past 2-3 years now, Nancy, something like that. And we talk about the aging process and we exchange thoughts and ideas about aging and the various aspects of aging. Well, a blurb was again put in the newsletter, and I suddenly got a call from a lady at the Paradise Community Center out at Longboat Key. And she asked if I would lead a group, but not about aging, having to do with current events out at the Paradise Community Center on Longboat Key. And so now every Monday, I have today at 1 o'clock, I met, and we met in person. We didn't Zoom, but we met outside. It was lovely out there. The weather's nice, and we distance ourselves so that we don't have to wear masks. And we had a very interesting discussion. Matter of fact, today the mayor of Longboat Key was there. Interesting man, interesting man. Jewish Family Services has now contacted Nancy and I and has asked us to chair another group. That would be a group, again, having to do with aging. So Nancy and I are going to be doing that, and that'll be done on Thursdays, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. My goodness. Now, if I take this on the road, you know, we could have a national thing here going here, Nancy, you and I, okay? But no, that's not for us. We don't need all that. In any event, I guess the bottom line is people have a need to get together, socialize. And I think these discussion groups like we're doing right now fulfills that need of people to get together, to communicate, to have a little chemistry. But people need people. People needing other people are the happiest people in the world. Barbara Streisand sang that, I think, you know. I think Julie Stein wrote it, didn't he? Yeah, people needing other people are the happiest people in the world. And that's what I think is important. But what is important to me in having moved from being a lawyer to the co-chair or chair of a discussion group is I have found in my later years a purpose. And I think that's the key in aging, finding a purpose for getting up in the morning, a purpose for being alive, a purpose for getting dressed. And I think I have found a purpose. Not everybody. Some people are happy with no purpose at all. They've done it all. But I needed a purpose. And I need the purpose of fulfilling a need for people to get together and socialize. Because I see the smile on their faces and they come to me and thank me. And you know something? I felt that way when I practiced law too. With the fees that I earned, they were fine. Helped me support my family. But you know something? The things that made me feel best was when a client came over to me after a case was done and gave me a big hug and said, thank you. Made me feel good, helping people. And that's really my life story. No trauma, but an uneventful occurrence. My wife's contracting dementia and my having to find another purpose in life because I was determined that I was not going to ride into the sunset. I was going to ride into the sunrise. But this is not about me. I'm supposed to host this. How did I get off on all that? Okay, let me introduce some of the other speakers who are going to tell you a little bit about their uneventful events or their unexpected events, unexpected events. And the first person is Mackie Bobis. Mackie, you're on.
Thank you. Thank you, Henry, for asking me to participate in this discussion. Thank you, Mike, for moderating. My name is Mackie Bobbies, and I was invited to speak about the trauma of my divorce and subsequent resilience. Last week, we had a dress rehearsal here, and which is pretty funny on Zoom. I could still leave my pajamas on. And after the session, after we all went, there was a critique. And my critique had to do with I was heavy on resilience, but not heavy enough on the trauma. I got off of the session and I started thinking. I went back, I was married, I've been divorced for 29 years. I was married for 23 years. And I went back, tried to go back to that time. And I just couldn't feel the trauma of the divorce. A light bulb went on over my head. My trauma was my marriage, not my divorce. My divorce was a relief and a release. I no longer was tied up in knots when I saw my husband's car in the garage. I was able to get phone calls from friends in the evening. I was able to go out with a birthday group and not get the cold shoulder for weeks afterwards. To me, the divorce was a sense of freedom. I have 3 daughters, 2 of whom were in college at the time. Now, and I had a caboose who was 9 years old. The process of divorce was traumatic, not the idea of the divorce. The process involved 2 years of going back and forth with attorneys, answering questions. Sorry, Mike, hiking up bills. And I felt that I had the sole responsibility of my 9-year-old daughter, 13 days out of 14. I had a very angry and bitter husband. I was ordered to go to career counseling, and I was subjected to taking tests to see what I was going to be in the future. I had graduated from college I lived in Washington, D.C., and I could not go back to that career. I was a medical technologist. And I was also expected to pay for 50% of my girls' college education. I had lost my identity as a wife, not as a mother, but as a wife, as a place in the community. I lived in Lexington, Kentucky for 40 years. And so my life was changing, but for me, it was going to be for the better. So let's switch to resilience. Before I was married, I think I was always a very independent person who was never really given the opportunity to express that independence. I broke the mold by going to medical school before I was married. I finished 2.5 years of medical school, passed part 1 of national boards, in a time where women were only 5 to 10% of medical school classes. Today, they're over 50%. I had always worked my whole life. I got a work permit when I was 16 years old. I worked in department stores. I worked at National Institutes of Health. I worked as a med tech for a few years. I typed newsletters. I typed workbooks. I was a medical transcriptionist, and I owned a thriving needlepoint business for 12 years. But medicine was built into me. Medicine was probably my passion, and it was in my bones. My father was a dentist. My brother was a pediatrician, and I was a candy striper. And some of you won't remember what candy stripers are, but I volunteered at the hospital every Saturday during my high school years. So I had to decide, what am I going to do? Medicine is your passion. So what did I do? I went to law school. Surprise. I lasted exactly 3 days. And it just, what was I thinking? I mean, that was really stupid. Then I decided to go over to the medical school. Luckily, Lexington is the home of the University of Kentucky. I went over to the medical school thinking I would just finish up med school 20 years later. The admissions counselor took one look at me and said, "You are too old." And so my 3 days in law school said, I think that's age discrimination. She actually did me a favor and told me about a program called the Physician's Assistant Program at the University of Kentucky. Long story short, I went over there. It was one of the most difficult things I had to do. I won the t-shirt saying "kicking and screaming" the whole way at graduation, but I finished in my mind. I finished a career that I loved, and I was able to put closure on what I hadn't been able to do in the past. So another trauma I'd like to talk about was actually moving to Florida. I had lived in Kentucky for 40 years. Two of my 3 daughters still live there. 2 of my 4 grandchildren still live there. I have a wonderful group of friends, single friends, who would go to dinner and the movies every Saturday night, and they decided to leave too. The problem is they were leaving and going to their families. They were going to their daughters. They were going to their grandchildren. I was leaving mine. This was probably more traumatic for me than my divorce, to be honest with you. So the independence gene kicked in once again, and I tippy-toed down to Sarasota, used all my vacation time while I was still working, and finally decided to make the move. Do I miss my kids and grandkids? Hey, terribly. It's been almost a year with COVID that I've seen them in person. They're in their little Hollywood Square boxes, and I really look forward to the day where I can be with them. As Mike said, people need people. We need our families. But I also moved to an incredible community, a community that has helped me grow physically, intellectually, spiritually. Sarasota provided the culture that I didn't have in Lexington. Lexington is known for basketball, horses, and a little bit of football. I have a group of friends that we call our chosen family, some of whom are on the Zoom tonight to support me. We called it the invisible thread. So in ending, I just want to say, I am very grateful to the universe and the invisible thread that led me here in this last chapter of my life. Thank you.
Oh, Mike, you're muted. Mike?
Mike, we can't hear you.
I asked you, oh, let's see. You should get a little notification there.
Mike, you are muted.
Okay, Sam, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, you're up. You're going to have to unmute yourself, okay? And why don't you tell us your story?
Thank you, Mike. The definition of resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from a blow, to bounce back. And in my case, I did not recover quickly, and I did not bounce back. If anything, I bounced down because I was hit with a series of blows, each one of which flattened me before I'd had time to recover from the previous one. When I was in my 40s, my then husband became mentally ill and did not receive appropriate diagnosis or treatment, and he just got worse and worse. He was sinking more and more. I stood by him. I neglected the children's needs because I felt that it was important for the children to have their father, but he became so paranoid that his distrust eventually extended to me, and he divorced me, which was a terrible blow to me. I was 47 years old and felt that I had been discarded after having put everything I had into the project of bringing him back to health, which I failed at. And I started dating again eventually, and after a year or so, I met a new man and fell head over heels in love, and he asked me to marry him, but I told him I needed time to think about it. I wasn't ready to jump back into marriage. And after dating that man for 2 years, I made the discovery that he had been lying to me with his marriage proposal, that he was in fact committed to another woman and had been cheating on her with me. And 3 days after I found that out, my younger daughter was killed. She was 20. And that was just more than I could stand up under. It flattened me totally. I couldn't function. I couldn't go to work anymore. I couldn't drive. I got lost in my own neighborhood. I couldn't remember anything. I was terrified that I would remain that way for the rest of my life. I felt brain damaged. And I didn't want to live. I wanted to die. But I couldn't, because I had another daughter, and she had lost everything I lost. She lost our family, her father, her sister, and I couldn't take me away from her. So I had to find a way to go on living. And I ultimately developed a recipe for my own healing. And the recipe, the first ingredient of the recipe was intention. It's very important, if we want to achieve something, that we decide that we're going to do it. And I decided that I was going to not only recover from all the blows I had experienced, but I was going to rise above them and be stronger than I had been before it all began. And the second ingredient was support. I knew I was going to need support, and I pulled in support from every source I could think of. My friends, my family. I went into therapy. I joined a support group for survivors of homicide victims. I really used all the support I could find. I also knew that I was spiritually deficient because I had become an atheist at the age of about 19, and I had not developed any framework within which to find meaning in my life. I hadn't prayed in decades. I needed spirituality. And so in conjunction with my intention and my making use of support, I also started searching for answers to the big questions. Why am I here? What does it mean? What's it all for? What am I supposed to be learning? What am I supposed to be doing? And that made me realize that I needed one more thing, and that was a goal, something to hang on to work toward. And I had always wanted to be a psychotherapist. Now, at this point, I was 50 years old, and I had no training to become a psychotherapist, but I had received psychotherapy and I had experienced the healing wonder of therapy, and I wanted to be a practitioner of psychotherapy. So I fought my way into graduate school. Like Mackie at law school, they didn't see me as a promising candidate, and I had to convince them that I was, and I did. And what would have taken me 4 years to accomplish if I had been young and healthy, at that age took me 10 years, because being in graduate school at that age and working simultaneously, because I was self-supporting, it cost me everything I had. It cost me my health. It cost me my home. I became homeless. I wandered from shelter to shelter. And I don't mean homeless shelters, but the homes of people who said, yeah, I have room for you. You could stay in my trailer, or you could stay in my cabin, or you can stay in my cottage. And I just moved from place to place. And at the end of 10 years, on the 10th anniversary to the day of my daughter's death, at the age of 60, I opened my first office. And it was, I get goosebumps just thinking about it. I did it to honor the memory of my daughter. I did it so that I would have a reason, as Mike said, to get up in the morning, to get dressed, to leave the house. I wanted to be able to be a mother to my surviving daughter, with whom I now enjoy a wonderful relationship. And I also met a new man after I had finished graduate school and was in private practice. And we married 17 years ago, and I'm very happy. You know, I was talking with someone today who has also suffered many losses. And she said, do you remember when we didn't think it was possible that we'd ever be happy again? And I said, yep, I remember. I wondered, if anyone had told me that I would be this happy, I would not have believed them. But I am. That doesn't mean that I am not still very sad about what happened, but I'm grateful for where I am. Very grateful. And I wrote a book about my healing experience. And I don't know if you can see this. It's called Someone to Talk to, Finding Peace, Purpose, Mike, and Joy After Tragedy and Loss. Yeah, it's my recipe for healing. And it won an award. And that was an achievement of which I'm very proud. So I don't know what the bottom line is. I came back. It wasn't, I didn't bounce back. I didn't recover quickly, but I'm back and I'm better than ever. And I'm happy and fulfilled. And at the age of 82, I'm still working as a psychotherapist. I see all of my clients online, and I derive great satisfaction from the feedback that I get from them when they tell me that I saved them. Who could ask for anything more? Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing, Samantha. It's very much appreciated. Thank you. You know, they say that music is a great aid to resilience. And we have a guest here, Antoinette Johnson, and I think she will heartily agree with that statement. So without further ado, let me introduce Antoinette Johnson. Antoinette, you're on. Okay, let's see if we can get Antoinette on.
Antoinette, you're muted. I've asked you to unmute there.
Gotta unmute
There you go.
Antoinette.
We can hear you.
Am I unmuted?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay, we need your picture up there.
We got her.
Have you got me?
Yes, ma'am. You're good to go.
First of all, I want to say thank you so much to those of you on the panel that have shared so transparently and in such a natural and real way with all of us. As co-chair of the Committee on Aging, Trauma, and Resilience, I can't tell you how much I would like everybody where I live to hear your stories. So when Henry and I were planning tonight's webinar, he asked me if I would share with everybody a song and some of the ways that music has helped me to heal and transform situations in my life and find resilience. And well, you know, let me count the ways. You notice this evening already, both Mike and Sam mentioned song titles. You can't ask for anything more than people. And there's a reason for that, isn't there? Because music reflects the stories of our lives. But I digress. So I would, on a different night, try to give you more information about how music can help you. And I will share a little bit of that. But I'm going to try to convey, because my life was difficult also, and I'm not here to show that, to share the details of that tonight. But I hope that I can share why music gave my life so much purpose and so much joy that I was able to continue, always continue. Anyway, for me to do that, I want to go back to when I was a very young child. And I'm really jumping out on a limb here. But the first time I ever heard music, and the reason I share this is to try to give you a sense of why it has meant so much to me all my life. So I must have been about 2, and I was still in a stroller, and they had to pick me up and put me on their shoulders. We were outside at a parade. And from a distance, I heard this drum and bugle corps. I'd never heard live music. And I heard the rhythm and the drums and the brass, and my little 2-year-old heart just started to beat, and I had never felt my heart beat. And I was ecstatic. Well, I started to cry, but it wasn't because I was scared. It was because I was having 2-year-old ecstasy here. And so that's how it began. And I didn't really know, of course, at that stage where music would take me. But there's a poem of Maya Angelou, it's just 2 sentences, that would describe for me. A bird doesn't sing because it has a song. Excuse me, a bird doesn't sing because it has the answer. A bird sings because it has a song. And that began to define my life's path. Music gave my life both definition and exquisite beauty, and a lot more. And it led me to a professional career as a vocalist. It also became my devotional art form, and I won't go into that, and my spiritual practice. Now, I also had, and I just want to say this quickly, in my life, a mother who was an amazing human being. She was my first and probably most important teacher. And she gave me the freedom to live my life and yet supported me. And I also had my life partner, Bobby, who I met eventually. He wasn't with me in the beginning years, and whoa, I'll tell you. And he was one of the finest drummers that ever lived, honestly. Mitzi Gaynor used to call him Mr. Time. So I had him as well, eventually. Music gave me purpose. It gave me possibilities. It gave me creativity, or the freedom to use that creativity, and grounding. You see, I can get high just talking about music, so grounding is also important. One of the other things that music gave my life was the experience to share and express what truly brings me joy. And that really makes a difference. You can get through a lot, and the music business, as any business, but the music business is not easy, let's face it. You know, not only the business piece, but you better have your act together at a certain point, or they won't ask you back. And I mean the musicians. So music also gave me sanctuary for my soul. It gave me refuge, and it has brought me through. I'm not a singer. I mean, I'm not on stage anymore. I don't perform anymore, and haven't for over 20 years. But music has had other places in my life. And I can tell you that when I went through an extremely difficult surgery, illness, and it took a lot of healing. Music was my refuge. Listening, using mantra, it supported me. That and some wonderful friends, prayers. So music gave me refuge and sanctuary. And it also gave me, in my life, great heights of, how can I say it, ecstasy. And when that happens, and you step out of, because music, as all art forms, is that combination, that balance of soul and technique. And that has to be there. So in those moments that you're really high, you're really reaching this almost, you're spiritual. And when it happens in a room that everybody has kind of come away from the ego, and your technique and your soul kind of merge, and the audience, and it happens, you're sung, you're played. And if you're really lucky, at least one of those people out there had an experience of the same. So it's not that different than life, is it? I mean, most poets, mystics, musicians, the balance between soul and technique is life itself, and to live an artful life, that's what we all want. So it poses the question, especially during these times that we are trying to learn to navigate this very precarious landscape. When you have a day that you've hit the wall, you've had enough, there isn't anything left, what is the music that you could bring into your life? And maybe you already are. What is the music that would help you to find balance, to relax, to self-nurture? Dance, energize. What is the music that could help to bring quality to that day and bring you back in balance, back in a place where you are thriving? So I'll leave that question with you for a minute. So another thing that music brought into my life were phenomenal people, not only in my career, but since. People with huge hearts, great gifts, and a lot of love. And one of those people was a man by the name of Sloan Wilson. And some of you may remember his name. Most of us in our age group. He won a Pulitzer Prize for a book that he wrote, A Man in the Gray Flannel Suit. Anyway, also they made a movie of one of his books, A Summer Place, and you may remember that song. I was very lucky in knowing he and his wife, and they became friends of mine. And he shared some words from his heart about what music meant to him. So I'd like them to share them with you. Music is the stuff of dreams, of memories, of longing, of yearning. Throughout all ages, whether stardust melody or rhythmic chant, the effect on the heart is the same. Love, the real thing, or memories of love, hope for love, yearning. And you know, it's like that, isn't it? When music really draws you, when you're present with it, when it draws you in. You know, musicians used to say it takes really big ears to get to Carnegie Hall, especially if you got lost when it was time for you to come in after the alto player had been riffing. And so music draws us in when we're truly present with it. It can change us. It can change our chemistry, and there's a whole other talk on all of that. And somebody said something like, the creation of music was the greatest gift, the most beautiful gift that humankind has given to the earth. And I guess you can kind of tell I feel like that. Homecoming. It draws us in. And when we give ourselves to it, it's like coming home after a long journey when we become involved deeply. When music reaches us in this way. And it's like being welcomed, embraced unconditionally. And at the same time, it offers us plateaus, landscapes that are timeless and universal. And it also helps us to go meaningfully into a place in ourselves. It helps us to get through a story before we even know that we have one, or a situation. So in that way, it brings us deeper into ourselves and connects us. There's a connection, a deep connection with ourselves and with each other. So I would like to offer you a song. And this is the first time I've ever done this from my dining room table. It's my first public Zoom. And by the way, I've heard that the kids now, they're doing, what are they calling them? Zoom-sicles. They're musicals. Zoom-sicles. So this song, though, is about blessing. It comes from an ancient Celtic prayer. And it conveys blessing, and it's well known all over the world. And while I'm singing it, you will see some photographs of Andrea Ruth, who's my partner and co-chair, and myself, some of our dearly beloved friends, families, and resilient heroes in our lives. So I'd like to share this song, and you can help me. If you'd all kind of just, take a breath, relax. Bring your attention to the heart and less on the screen. And it would give me great joy to offer this to you. May the long-time sun rise upon you, all love surround you, and the pure light within you guide your way on, guide your way on. May the long-time sun rise upon you, all love surround you, and the pure light within you guide your way on, guide your way on. May the long-time sun rise upon you, all love surround you, and the pure light within you guide your way on, guide your way on. May the pure light within you guide your way on. Sat Nam. Thank you.
All right, Michael.
I
back to
presume
you.
that, yes, yes, thank you. Thank you, Antoinette. That was lovely. Thank you. And lastly, let me introduce the last person on our in our sharing experience. Very special lady, Dr. Nancy Schlossberg. She's going to talk to you a little bit about developing resilience. And keeping with what I know about Nancy, she will not be overwhelmed, and she will be coping with life's ups and downs. You notice the plug, Nancy? The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm just trying to get the overhead, but I guess you'll take care of that. First of all, I think everything we heard was extremely moving. Mike's divorce and finding a new purpose, Mackie's unhappy marriage and finding a way in a wonderful neighborhood and a wonderful community, Sam's triple whammy with one thing after another. And I read her book, and I thought I was doing a favor for her by just reading the book, and I would read a few pages. Well, I read the whole thing. I couldn't put it down. It was very engrossing and very revealing and very special. And now here, all of the people that we heard from have found a way. And then Antoinette's wonderful music, what she had to say about it, and then her song. So really, I think what it says is everybody seems to find their own way and come out of a depth and misery and move on. My mission tonight is very simple, very short. what can we do as individuals to practice resilience so that hopefully when something knocks us aside or knocks us down, we can get up again? And there's no easy answer, there's no simple answer, but there are a few pointers that I'd like to make. The metaphor for resilience, the rubber band has been used many times. It stretches and then goes back. But when I think about that metaphor, it is lacking. Look at the children today who have been separated from their parents at the border, who probably will never meet up with their parents. That's not a rubber band that stretches out and goes back. They'll never get back to where they were. Luckily, some people do recover and get back to a life where they were. And for others, and we've heard that today, for others, they move forward. And one author wrote, I love these words, some people, quote, sway the direction of their biographies. And I think we heard that from Sam and Mackie, that they have swayed their biographies. They've not just, they're not a rubber band going back to what was, they're moving ahead, they're thriving. And all of the people we heard from today really are in a thriving mode. So what can we do to help ourselves? I wonder if we could have the graphic now. Good. It's simple. These are some things we can practice. These are some things, they're not going to give us the answer, but a strategy. First of all, when something happens, you are immediately appraising the trauma and your resources for coping with it. And when you don't feel that you don't have the resources, and this is an emotional reaction, not an intellectual reaction, when you don't feel you have the resources, that's when you feel undone by the trauma. So what you can do, what we can focus on is how to strengthen our resources. What are our resources for coping? If we can have that, yeah. We have what I call the 4S system. At any point in time, we have potential resources or deficits. We could be having something happen, and if our situation is good, we are better off. Is our situation a positive or a negative? If we get fired from a job, in the meantime, we've gotten a diagnosis of cancer, our situation isn't good. Sam talked about a situation not being good when she had to face certain things. So your situation is a factor. Yourself, are you an optimist or a pessimist? Are you bringing something positive to the situation, or are you, as Sam said at one point, almost wanting to die? What kind of supports do you have? Everybody has talked about supports. And what are your coping strategies? There is no magic coping strategy, by the way. If there were, I would be very thin. I got a book once on getting thin by imaging yourself in a bikini. And I imaged and imaged and imaged, it didn't work. And I realized then that a single strategy is never the answer. So sometimes you know that you've coped well with a trying situation, and other times you haven't. What's the difference? It's the balance of your resources to deficits at any point in time, and those change over time. So your potential resources, situation, self-support strategies, when they're aligned with the stars, then your life, you can recover and become resilient. When one of them is out of balance, that's what creates a problem. And if you analyze what is giving you the problem, is it yourself? Is it your situation? Is it your supports? Is it your strategies? You can zero in on that, and you can focus on that to strengthen that resource. But the one thing that you can always do is have a strategy, a coping strategy. When something goes wrong, when something is upsetting you, you can ask 3 key questions. They'll go up on the, yes. Something happens. You ask yourself, can I change the situation? And if I can't, I can try to brainstorm, can I figure out a way? But if the situation, you have a husband that your stomach clutches when he comes home, as Mackie talked about, when you have something that feels as if you can't even change that situation, now you can move to redefining it. And I will give a superficial example. I was a recent widow and was traveling alone from London to Tampa. I was feeling very vulnerable, traveling alone, having lost my husband of 48 years. And I get into the airplane, and immediately the pilot announces that we are going into a terrible hurricane. He probably didn't use the word terrible, into a hurricane in Tampa, and that he would keep us notified. Well, I am telling you that my heart was beating, and I thought it was beating out of my skin. I really never had my heart beat like that. It was really terrifying. And he kept coming back and telling us about this hurricane, and I had nobody's hand to hold, and all I had was my head and thinking. So I thought, okay, what can I do? Well, I thought I could redefine it. I don't need to be scared about dying. Let me embrace it. Let's suppose it happens. Wouldn't that be terrific? First of all, I wouldn't have had to go through a horrible illness. I would have missed all that. And secondly, my kids would inherit some money because I haven't outlived my money. And if I live too long, I might. Well, by the time we got to Tampa, and there was no hurricane, and my son met me at the airport, I said, you've just missed out on some money. I was even sort of disappointed. Now, it's this thing that I try to do whenever something happens that I can't change. How can I look at it differently? People where I live were complaining one night about bad service. Oh my God, they went on and on and on and on. And I said, isn't it wonderful that we have bad service tonight? We can talk more. We can explore things more. So practice in little ways about things that aren't important, about bad service, so that you can redefine and see it. I was jilted once. I know that's hard to believe. If, Mike, you don't believe it, your co-leader was jilted. I mean, that's impossible, but it happened. And it was from somebody who was a professor at NYU. It was your school. So I was beside myself. It's a very demoralizing thing to be jilted. If I hadn't been jilted, I would have never met my husband. I would have never had the 48 years with a wonderful man. So each devastating thing, if you can see that that you can redefine it and you can look for the silver lining. I know it's superficial, it's not spiritual, but it works. And we practice it on little things. So if you can't change the situation and you redefine it, whichever happens, you can always stay calm by stress reducing strategies. And these we can do all the time. Meditating, our spiritual life, music, exercising, deep breathing, that should be automatic. And that is really important. And these are things you can do all the time, and you don't need a trauma to do them. So what I'm suggesting is a cognitive approach in addition to a spiritual, religious approach to life, in which you look things squarely in the face and you ask yourself the three questions: can I change it? Can I redefine it? How can I stay calm in the midst of all this chaos? And I would like to end with my mantra. Today is not forever. And I say that to myself whenever I feel in trouble, whenever I feel distressed. You look back over your life and you see today is not forever. And that in a way gives you perspective that you, as I think Sam said, would she ever be happy again? So I think hearing from Mackie, Sam, and Mike, we see terrible things can happen, but that's not the end of us. It's not over. And we have within us the capacity to do things, to make our lives better, and to be resilient, and to quote, to sway the direction of our biographies. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you very much. According to the schedule that I have here, we were going to facilitate the asking of any questions that you might have. And I noted while the speakers were speaking that there were several people who did pose questions as on the chat. And I'm just wondering how you want to handle that.
Yeah.
I don't see everybody on the screen, so I don't know whose hand is up. Ah, that's good.
How's
If
that?
you'd like to ask questions, I'd be happy to, if you'll raise your hand, I'll try to recognize you and we'll unmute you and you can fire a question and
Mike,
let us know who you want
you aren't going
to
do it
answer
that
the
way.
question.
Mike,
Yes,
we're not going to do it that way. Annalisa's got access to the chat.
I'm sorry.
So Annalisa's got access to the
Ah,
chat. We're going to deal with
okay.
it that way.
Well, that's good. That's even better.
Yeah,
So
we're
Okay.
going to run out of
yeah.
time if we aren't careful.
I got one here. Linda Carpenter said, these are great ideas for dealing with trauma defined as disruption in your life, but I'm wondering how the notion of resilience applies from these stories in Dr. Nancy Schlossberg's presentation to the trauma that Dr. Andrea Blanche spoke about a while ago in an SRQ Strong presentation about racism, trauma, and resilience.
Well, is there anybody who would like to answer that question?
Where's our experts?
Well, I didn't quite understand the question. Can you?
All right. Could you read it again?
Yeah, she said, I'm wondering how the notion of resilience applies from these stories in Dr. Nancy's presentation to the trauma that Dr. Andrea Blanche spoke about a while ago in the racism, trauma, and resilience presentation that we had. Maybe.
Who heard Andrea Blanche's presentation? I don't. Did anybody hear that?
No,
Maybe
that's
Andrea
Andy,
would like to
maybe,
tell us.
maybe you want to hop on?
Yes, Andrea, why don't you unmute and we'll let you tell us about your experience so that we know what we're responding to.
Sure. The talk was about racism in the United States and how growing up in circumstances where you're not respected, You may encounter daily assaults to your bodily integrity, and you're walking around in fear constantly. It's not an unexpected occurrence. It's living in a set of circumstances that is continually traumatic, and you have no control over it. So there's no way to get out of, to get out of it, to stop it. You can't just make the society a less racist society. And those kinds of small but continual assaults to your own integrity as a human being over time can be just as traumatic as an incidence of violence. So I think the question is, how would you apply these tools and what we've been talking about tonight to that set of circumstances where the trauma is
Ongoing.
and a condition of the environment in which you live?
All right.
Thank you.
Antoinette,
Thank you.
Shaking your head. Do you have an answer to that?
Well, hang on.
Oh,
The notion that I was getting at is the notion of resilience, which Helen Neal Ali talked about at that presentation.
Oh,
But if we're talking about resilience, there has to be some continuity across contexts. So I look at the situation today in our country, and my immediate reaction is Black people are incredibly resilient. How have they stood up to this for centuries and continued to exist? So I'm now listening to notions of resilience for something that's a disruption in your life, a divorce, the loss of a child. Not saying that those are not horrific experiences, they are. But the suggestions for how a person becomes resilient seems to be focused on something here and now that you might actually be able to negotiate. Where does that resilience come from? Where did Mike pull, for lack of a better word, the inner strength? Samantha, that inner strength to say to themselves, okay, I can deal with this. How do you look at resilience across those contexts? Because I see the trigger as very different. But resilience is resilience. That's where the question was coming from. And I don't know if that helps anybody think about it. And if not, I apologize for dropping a serious bomb into what was a wonderful presentation.
No, I would like to speak to that, if I may.
who is this?
This is Sam.
Sam, good.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you.
It takes enormous determination. As I said, I didn't bounce back. It wasn't quick. It was a long, hard upward climb. In some ways analogous to a young Black person trying to climb out of the ghetto. And luckily, I had all the support that I did. And I think that's why we need to encourage and support people, disadvantaged people, to have goals and to pursue them. And we need to encourage them to keep going, keep working, because it doesn't matter how long it takes to get there, as long as you get there.
Antoinette,
Any
it
other
looks
thoughts
like
on
you're-
I have something to say.
Yes, please, Antoinette, go ahead.
And thank you. Very good question. And we're talking about a different aspect of societal trauma here from my perspective. We tonight, of course, are talking about aging. And I'm sorry, but what is the lady's name that asked the question?
Linda Carpenter.
Hi, Linda.
Hi.
Okay, I certainly do not have the background or the training to give you a more definitive answer. But one thing that comes to my mind is that is exactly why we have formed Sarasota Strong, because all of the things that have been available so far have just been Band-Aids. Because number one, our system, as far as mental health, but it's more than this. It's helping communities at a grassroots level to be educated about trauma, to be educated about what dysfunction in the home and violence in the home, how all of this it acts both societally and neurologically. But more than that, so we need more of what's going on with the work that Sarasota Strong is doing and Reverend Paul up in Pittsburgh. It's taking it one community at a time and helping the families to begin to understand their generational trauma. And it's not going to happen overnight. But that's one thing I would contribute.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other thoughts on that particular subject? Yes, Andrea, go ahead. You're on.
Thanks again. I just want to point out that, in fact, although the precipitating factors may seem very different in these two sets of traumatic experiences, and maybe, you know, the situations seem very different, but if you really look at how have African Americans survived a century in this country, they've used a lot of the tools that were mentioned today in people's individual stories. Okay, so a sense of purpose and meaning, getting active to try to make a difference, support. I mean, the family in the African American community and the tight relationships between friends and neighbors, the social support, mutual support structures are very strong in communities of color. Music, right? Music has been a savior for people who have, you know, been in oppressive circumstances, and certainly religion as a deep dependence on something larger than yourself. I think if you look at what was talked about tonight, you'd find that those coping strategies are in fact useful regardless of the type of trauma.
What an excellent point. Thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you for addressing a convoluted question.
No, Linda, the
Thank
problem
you.
with that, you know, getting an answer to that question, there isn't anybody in this group. And the one lady who isn't with the group at this point. There's only one Black person who was involved in this group who might be able to answer that question as a Black person. None of us really can put ourselves in that position because we're just not faced with that reality. On a personal level, with what I experienced when suddenly I turned around and a lady who had been such a dynamic partner of mine for so many years, 50 at the point when she was diagnosed with vascular dementia, suddenly and very quickly became 20% of the person that she was. That was a devastating experience to watch that. And the way I got through it on that level that I can understand because I lived it, I looked for something positive. And the thing that I found that was positive, believe it or not, even though there was only 20% of her still there, was her. I developed just a greater feeling of love and compassion that I had really, as much as I loved her, that I had never felt before. I loved her more, the less of her that there was. And so I looked for a positive. And that's what carried me through the 7 years of taking care of her until she passed away. So on that level, you know, I can talk to you about, you know, making that adjustment that Nancy was talking about. looking for the positives, you know? And by the way, another thing that's interesting to me as we're sitting here and talking and I'm looking at the screen, again, it's just Henry and I, all the rest, ladies. It's funny the way the men disappear. Interesting. And that's another subject, right? I went through a whole session of talking about men learning how to share feelings. Circle of Men, it was called. Robert Bly, Fire in the Belly. Remember that? Back in the 80s.
More questions here.
And 15 years playing with that. And I learned to get some fire in my belly and to be able to share feelings. Unfortunately, most men, I find, don't. But you ladies do. You know how to share feelings. You're better off for it. You're better off for it. Yeah. Anybody else with a thought? Or am I dominating this thing? I'll shut up. Okay, yes. Amy.
Hi,
Amy, go ahead. You're up.
I thank all of you. I feel like I've probably met some of you at the Friendship Center when I was taking care of my mom. And she, yes. So anyway, I just wanted to say about the resilience part. I think part of resiliency comes from when you're very young and the pillars that are around you teaching you. I don't think it's something that you just acquire at the age of 20 or when your mom is, you know, has Lewy body dementia, and then all of a sudden you go into resiliency. I don't think that happens. I think if you're, whatever culture you're living in, wherever your pillars are, let's say your parents are limited, but you're still surrounded by 4 grandparents, or even if you're adopted and you know, those are strong pillars. So I think resiliency starts at a very young age. Some of us are going to be more resilient than others, and they're going to be, you know, a spectrum of it. But if you can bounce back in your own way, that's resilient enough for you.
Thank you. By the way, in my own experience, having used the Zoom on other occasions, if you have something you'd like to contribute, just raise your hand. I'll see you, and then we'll unmute you, and you're up. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I think Rita fed him. Yes.
Wait a minute. Annalise, what's the situation on the chat room?
Yeah, at this time, we don't have any other questions in the chat, just a lot of praise for everyone sharing their stories and the songs going on. I will let you know we are a few minutes over time, but if you want to continue taking questions.
All right. Well, there's one more from Rita, so why don't we let her ask her question? Go ahead, Rita, you're up.
Well, it's not a question. My personal opinion is uneventful events are traumatic. They can be small, they can be big. I think for me in my life, I made a decision when I was 11 years of age to do things differently. And it was a decision that I made, fortunately. But I think also gratitude and appreciation for people helps their resiliency, to show them that you are grateful for what they have done or what they've contributed, empowers them to go forward. And I'm lucky I had that inner strength that Amy sort of referred to have that resiliency, and it served me well through my life. But I think it is something that for others that has to be learned and encouraged. And I think even little events are traumatic. It depends how the person's life and their stories and what they experienced or how they see their perspectives, how they interpret events in their life. But basically, they're basically traumatic things. And I think we have to learn. I think you're doing great work, because I think the sense of belonging is something that we're born with. We need to belong to our families of origin, the world, whatever. Our families, marriage, whatever, however you want to look at it. But belonging is our primary goal. And I think you're doing great work with encouraging that sense of belonging. But then again, we have to look at what is going to help people heal, what is going to help people have resilience. And that's my contribution.
Thank you. Thank you for your contribution.
Mike.
By the way, you can see that people do like to share thoughts. And that's what discussion groups are about. And that is the value. People sharing thoughts with people, as opposed to sitting and being lectured, you know?
Exactly.
Sharing thoughts. People like that. That's been my experience.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to
Yes,
Annalisa
thank
here because we're running on a clock. We're gonna be careful of.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's a pretty good wrapping up point.
Okay.
And then to share on to what we have going on next month, it kind of goes right into the value of peers in mental health.
All right.
So next month you can join us. We'll meet on Zoom again. It'll be Monday, December 28th from 6 o'clock to 7:30, just like we had tonight. We're gonna have a nice range of panelists. We're gonna have some youth peers on as well. So we really hope you can join us then. But before we head out, I would love if Antoinette, if you wanna just share a little bit about the Aging Committee.
Yes, Annalise, thank you. Again, I want to give my very deep and heartfelt thanks to everybody. You have all been amazing, and I think tonight's program really has said a lot. And sadly, my much cared for co-chair on the Committee for Aging, Trauma and Resilience, Andrea Ruth, could not be with us tonight because I think Henry mentioned earlier that she had to fly to Missouri because her stepfather passed away. So we deeply miss you, Andrea. But I've been asked to let everybody know we've got great people on our committee. Rita, Henry, we need more. It would be wonderful if you are interested, if you'd let us know. And if you're not wanting to be on a committee, your ideas are welcome, so welcome. And because we're moving in whatever directions we can to begin to try to make a difference for those that are seniors and those that are aging during this pandemic. So I'm going to turn it back to our wonderful assistant and technician, Annalise, and let her give you that information.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
So you'll see on the bottom of the screen here, if you visit srqstrong.org, you can find out about all of our groups that you can get involved with. You can take healing workshops that are facilitated by Helen Neal Ali, who was joining us earlier. We have an action group if you really want to get your boots on the ground, as they say, and really get the wheels turning. You can join Andy Blanche in the action group. We also have an education group if you are interested in going out into the community and sharing a topic, whatever it may be, whatever you are most experienced with that you think our community needs to hear about. Contact us and let us know. If you have ideas that you want to share for the Aging Committee, if you're not necessarily wanting to get actively involved, you just have an idea, email us at sarasotastrong@gmail.com. We would love to hear everything that you have to contribute. Now I'll pass it back over to Henry, who can wrap us up there.
I would give you all my personal thanks again, and especially to the team members from all corners of the screen here that helped to put this together. And thank you for your participation. Everybody else who's in a little tiny picture right now. We've enjoyed this effort and hope that we've provided some information that is useful and helpful to the community. So thank you very much. Annalisa, you're in charge.
That's it, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll see you at next month's conversation.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well done. Well done.